First of all, it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Martin Carver, and let me briefly introduce him. He is a world-famous archaeologist, and he has directed very important projects from Scotland to Algeria, passing through France, Italy, and now Sicily. One of his most famous excavations is the one in Sutton Hoo in South England. And what is also special of his academic research is the reflection on the archaeological methods, and especially he looked how archaeology is practiced all over the world. So I was really pleased in 2013 when Martin agreed to join me to design a totally new project. Well, the project is called Sicily in Transition, it's supposed to study how the changing of regime were affecting everyday life of the people. So I think Professor Carver can go on explaining how the project was thought and how it started.
It's been a great privilege for me to be able to work with my colleague Alessandro Molinari for many years, especially in Sicily. I didn't know Sicily, so I was able to be introduced to Sicily. So what we did was we got together in 2014 and we signed a little agreement, our two universities, York in England and University of Tor Vergata here in Rome. We also had another university from the University of Salento, particularly the centre in Lecce, who provided the environment. So to give you an idea of the intellectual geography, basically Alessandra is the person who really understands and knows early medieval Sicily. York contributed a laboratory, really, the BioArc, we called it, laboratory, the scientific laboratory, which analyzes biomolecular signatures of artifacts. We'll show you some of those in a minute. And then at Lecce, they are specialists in environmental archaeology. So we were already quite a good team. In fact, other people have joined us as we've gone along, which is brilliant. So it was really just a question of seeing whether we could find any money. And that's what university life is like, as you know, and especially for research. And we had the good luck to get a grant from the European Research Council. This is a tremendous asset. I mean, it's not many universities that get these. Some universities get rather too many of them, but we were very proud to get ours and to be able to share it with 3 universities. So it's 2 million plus euros. It's quite a good big grant. It only lasts 5 years, so you have to get a program that fits into 5 years. That's hard. It's particularly hard in archaeology. But anyway, 2016 we were off, and then 2017, 2018, 2019 we did our fieldwork in Sicily, and that's been a tremendous success. And we were lucky enough to finish the fieldwork just at the moment that COVID struck. Since then, we've been trying to get the write-up done, and we'll be telling you about some of our results as we go on. So here's a picture of the site at Castronova di Sicilia, which is one of the ones that we focused on. And you see here a Sicilian family of farmers. They're at the top of Monte Cassar. They're busy sowing grass in order to feed their sheep. Our interest, our joint interest, not just in the early Middle Ages, not just in the political history, not just in the cultural history, but also the people who were doing all the work, if you like, the farmers, the merchants, the fishermen. Those were the people. Those people and their families, they were what we wanted to find out about. And of course, they don't build big monuments, but they all have they all have their histories which are inside them. So when they die and are buried in the cemeteries, their bones tell their story. So we needed this biomolecular approach to do that. So the background of this is that Sicily is not only a marvelous place to be, but in the middle of the Mediterranean. Everybody wants a piece of it. Everybody wants to go there. But Romans, Byzantines, Abbasid Muslims, Fatimid Muslims, Normans, Swabians, they all visit Sicily. And so we designed a project which would say what happened to the ordinary people of Sicily as their regime changed. We were very lucky in that Professor Molinari had so many contacts in Sicily already that it was possible to get the kind of samples that we wanted to analyze the data of the biological data of the individuals. This map shows all the places that we got samples from. But just to show you two very important sites, Mezzara del Vallo, that's a site that Alessandra dug in the 90s. It was, I think it's not really rescued, was it? It was more sort of...
It was a rescue archaeology.
It was a rescue archaeology, all right. Yeah. And we rescued the rescue archaeology.
Yeah.
So that, but it so happened that there was a marvelous collection of well-preserved finds from Mezzara. So that's our first publication and our first achievement. Castronova di Sicilia is in the middle of Sicily there. You've just seen a picture of the landscape. Beautiful place, absolutely lovely. And it is a multi-period site. So the Romans were there, Byzantines were there, the Muslims were there, the Normans were there, and the Swabians were there. So it was able to tell the whole story for us. Here's our teams. On the right, York, on the left, Rome, and at the bottom, Lecce. Lots of young people who had a great time with us and whose careers we helped, I think. Next one. So this is the design. So the basic idea is very simple. You have data sets where we could acquire samples, Mezzara, Castronovo, 26 different cemeteries, and they feed a first level of analysis. So from the excavations, you get coins, ceramics, plant remains, fossil remains, human remains, and then they are then analyzed to give the province of the ceramics, where were they made. Oxygen residue analysis says where people were moving in their lifetime, carbon, nitrogen, is a diet, and organic residue analysis, sorry, I made a mistake. That's material that is inside the fabric of the pottery and tells you what was in the pots. Oxygen is the one that reports mobility. Ancient DNA reports ancestry. So the next row shows the kind of information that we're able to draw from this. And we've got three big targets that we want to know about: trade, agriculture, and demography.
And about agriculture, in which we especially had big results, I want to stress that we were working on food especially, and so how food habits and tastes were changing through time. So how food was produced, consumed, and traded. So this is very important. And what is also was one of the big questions of our research is the so-called green revolution. And this is very important in the Mediterranean because there was a big hypothesis that with the Islamic empire, new plants, a new way of cultivating them were coming in the Mediterranean. So, for example, aubergines, spinach, sugarcane, cotton, all arrived through the Islamic invasion and the creation of the Islamic empire. There's a lot of work done by historians, but there's still a lot to do with archaeology. And later on, we will show some of the results coming from archaeology. Let's go on.
So in fact, when we get to Mazzara, you'll see that we found lots of plants in the... so we're going to talk about Castronova, then Mazzara, and then the cemeteries in that order. This is the Castronovo site.
So this is the Castronovo area, a wonderful area in the middle of Sicily, very well preserved, and with sites of different ages. And what is important of our project that we did not concentrate on one only site, but several of them to better understand the dynamics of how peasants were living and how the power in the countryside was can be seen through the settlement. So in this area we have a Roman villa. You can see it from the slide, and then we have a statio, a road station, and a village with a long life, 3rd, 14th century. And then we have a special site, a fortress, a Byzantine fortress with amazing structure still preserved. And finally, nowadays, village has a long story as well, starting in the Islamic period, and with an amazing landscape done by irrigated terraces. And this is also an Islamic origin technique. So let's have a look. So maybe we want to say something?
Well, we loved Castronova. We liked the people of Castronova very much, and we wanted to give them a present when we left. So this was a painting by our artist in residence. So we appointed an artist in residence because although we're very scientific archaeologists, we like the extra added value that comes from having an artist with us. And she did amazing drawings of people digging and so on, which added a lot of life. This was the picture. A slight touch of the clay, you know, sort of slopey roofs and things. Anyway, they liked it, and they're hanging it up in the town hall now.
So let's start with the big Byzantine fortress. You can see it's a high mountain. And here, well, it's a very large site. So we decided a strategy to trying to understand when it was built and how it was managed. So people at work, some of the view from the castle, the fortress, and you can see the step to go on the wall.
This is the fortress wall, the actual wall.
Yeah, it was built from Constantinople between the 7th and 8th century. Well, the Mediterranean was going very badly, but still Constantinople wanted to keep Sicily because it was a very rich area. We use a lot of new devices, and well, drones are not new anymore, but just to have an idea on how drones are useful for the archaeological excavation and documentation.
I think it's worth saying that the drone has revolutionized archaeology. You can see much more from up above a site than you can see when you're on the site. So it's been amazingly helpful at understanding excavations while they're going on. This is no exception. So we're in the middle of Monte Cassai here. We've discovered a headquarters, or we're re-excavating a headquarters building. Discovered it had a tower. So it's been a tremendous asset. We've developed drones while we've been there, so we've been contributing to this revolution.
And drones were very useful, and Tor Vergata was leading in this, to have an idea of how many buildings, how many empty spaces there were on this big mound. And going on, there's a PhD performed in Tor Vergata using different kind of cameras, so you can see more things from the air. So this was useful to a better understanding of the site.
Are these using different wavelengths? Is that how they do that?
Yeah.
So you can get more detail from different wavelengths of light. It's quite neat.
Yeah. And finally, we were able to understand how the fortress was working.
So we've got the red line at the top, which gives you the line of the fortress defence, and it's got 11 towers all the way along. So they thought the enemy would be coming from the top there, in this direction, because all the rest of the Monte Cassar promontory is very steep, so it can easily repel the enemy. We have a headquarters building which is in blue. We just saw it on the drone. And those arrows are trying to say, the yellow arrows are trying to say what you can see from which place. So we just saw intervention 14. That was one of the fortified lookout points. So basically, these yellow arrows connect the lookout points. So it's a very unusual find, this, because most of the old towns that were defended in the Byzantine period have turned into new towns, and it's much harder to see. But here you could see, because there's hardly any settlement in it, it must have had a different kind of use, and we think that use could well be to house cavalry.
And here a reconstruction of how the fortress should be in the 8th century. And this is based on our research, so it's no fantasy. It's how it probably was. And another research was in the town of Castronovo and the irrigated terraces. And this is very interesting because it's a kind of system using the water in the best way. And that was the technique that the Muslim imported in Sicily. And this made possible to cultivate plants that were subtropical. So it was a way of import plants and also new techniques to grow them. So we studied the system of the terraces in Castronovo, and in this we were helped by another ERC project. And what is nice of the ERC project is they are attracting cooperation with other ERC projects. So I will see later that other projects are connected with ours. So the results are going to be even more important and new. So let's go in the valley.
In the valley, yes. These collaborations are really important because we basically, the scientists give each other access to each other's samples, and they tell you something new about them. It's been brilliant, that. Now, this is the survey, intensive survey, down by the river, Platini, and it's now the site of the road, the main road that leads from Palermo to Agrigento. These little coloured squares are the areas that we surveyed from the surface. So basically we used geophysical survey, which detects former buildings, for example. We use surface survey, which shows the distribution of the pottery, implying the position of settlements at different periods, because we can date the pottery. You can see a magnetometer here, worked by James Lyell. That's quite a modern form of geophysics. So these were methods by which we put together. I think we've got a picture now with these are the centers of occupation: late Roman, Byzantine, Islamic Norman. And actually, we also picked up a Middle Bronze Age settlement there. So these types of survey are extremely useful at locating where the excavation should happen. Well, one of them obviously was by the Casale itself, the Casale building. We started by digging a trench, and then the trench found a piece of wall, and those were the layers that buried the piece of wall, and those are the layers underneath it. And these are the bits of pottery on the left side here that help us to date where we are in time. So this quite low-key excavation helped us write the program for the future years. So having found a piece of wall, having dated it, we were then able to open up the whole area and find a settlement of a really astonishing kind. Roman buildings, Byzantine buildings, Islamic building had all been added to each other. So the whole thing was it's like a long-lived project. And that project provided a way station, also probably a provision for horses. Why? Because this long-lived settlement was serving the main road along which people moved. And in some ways it's still, well, not that, but the same thing is happening now with the Esso garage, which I think we've got. Oh, sorry, you've got things to look at first.
Well, the finds were amazing in this site, and they were very telling altogether. So first of all, we found these two rings that are seal rings, and then we found all these objects that are rather unusual, but altogether they were telling us something really interesting. So we have a seal box that was used in the Roman period for certified letters. And then we have a touchstone that was used to test precious metals, gold coins, silver coins, to see the quality of the metal. And then we have a stylus. We had golden coins from the Islamic period that were tested. So they thought they were false. So they were trying to look if they were good or not. Maybe they were not. So we have to analyze if this real gold or not. And then we have the glass jetons that were used as weight for the coins. So why all these objects are in Casale San Pietro? It was a stazio, a place where people stop along the main roads linking Palermo and Agrigento, and you could change horses, as Martin was saying, but also we think that taxes were paid in that site. And see here, well, a much later pictures, but in which tax collector and money changer were using the touchstone and things like the one we found. So it was showing the touchstone.
Not very flattering to the profession, I don't think.
Yeah.
This particular picture.
So nowadays, petrol station, you have imagined something like that, but where also taxes were paid. So this is very important because this site was something connected with the state, with the public, through a different regime. We had Byzantine, Muslim, and Norman, and the place was still there. So this means that the state was functioning in similar ways. This is very important, I think, as discovery. And let's go to Mazara very briefly. And as Martin was saying, this was a very old excavation I directed in 1997, a rescue excavation. But what was special, it was an area full of pits, especially cesspits. in which the finds were perfectly preserved. So from these contexts, we were able to reconstruct amazing stories.
Notice the Carina camel, the little camel there.
Yeah, that is wonderful. Was coming. So, can you imagine a lot of pits, cesspits, some of them full of rubbish. So, the paradise for archaeologists. And one thing was the work done by some colleague of us on animal bones about food taboo. And what is interesting is that pork bones are not present at all in the Islamic period, but in the subsequent Christian period, pig was used again. So this was a taboo that was respected in the towns, in the Islamic towns. And what was quite funny is that we were able to study chicken bones by isotopes. And even this, we were able, through the bioarc analysis in York, to see the strong difference between Islamic chicken and Swabian chicken. That there were completely different feeding. So one was according to the Islamic law, the Islamic chicken, and very different food for the Swabian period. Other discoveries done by our partner in Lecce, in Salento, was what I always saying the most old seed of aubergine in all Europe, and other plants that are seen for the first time in an archaeological context. So aubergine, spinach, watermelon, and cotton, all these plants change our way of staying at the table. Well, in Sicily, aubergines are so important, as you know, and cotton. Cotton is something very important in the economic history of the Middle Ages. So we found the very old cotton seeds that was introduced in Sicily. And something more about food habits. In York, again, we were able to study the organic contexts that were in the clay, they were still in the clay, and we were able to reconstruct what was cooked in what kind of cooking pot. And something that is nice to say is that a special pot, homemade pot, was used only to cook goat and sheep, and so on. Maybe Martin likes to add something.
This is a piece of work done by one of our PhD students at York, Jasmine Lundy, very fine piece of work. But as you see, the trick is to look at the walls of the pottery and see how the chemicals have soaked into the walls. This is how it's done. And then they're extracted, and then they're separated from each other into lots of different amino acids. In this particular case, Jasmine was trying to see whether there was a difference between the town and the country. It's one of the questions we were always asking at that period. And in this case, rural Casali San Pietro, which is in some ways a rather special type of settlement, as you've heard, they were using wine, they were using dairy foods, and these weren't happening at all in Palermo, in Islamic Palermo, in Palazzo Boneggia, for example. So that was an interesting result.
Yeah. So different way of cooking in the countryside or in the highly Islamized town in Palermo, the capital of Islamic Sicily. So working on trade as well. And what is very important to say that, well, trade in Amphora didn't disappear after the fall of the Roman Empire, but went on. And, well, there's a lot of study, but we improved them. So we were able to recognize the Islamic amphoras and to demonstrate how connected was Sicily, especially in the Islamic period. And what is funny is that they were exporting wine. Well, you will see soon. Again, talking about trade, we were able to perform a lot of an analysis of the clay to understand the provenance of the pottery. So we were able to reconstruct different networks through different regimes. So the geopolitics was very important for the flow of goods. So let's have a look at the map. So changing networks with changing regimes. So a lot of things coming from the Islamic country and much less from other parts of the Mediterranean. But these things changed a lot in the Swabian age, so the Christian Swabian age. As you can see, things arrived from north of Italy and, well, still from the Islamic country. But there's a complete change in the production center. And yeah, to add something, while I'm designing a new project on this topic, is that the Islamic Sicily was very complex in looking at the its economy. So what we can say is that the rebirth of trade after the year 1000 was because of the Islamic country like Egypt, North Africa and Sicily. They were very complex, much more than Italy. So another story can be told from archaeology.
So the trick with these maps and to know what's happening to trade through time, from the science point of view, first of all, you need to be able to identify the grit which is in the fabric of the amphora. That says where the amphora were made. And the second thing that we did was to look at the content of the amphora. Well, it's not the first time that's been done, but we did it, I think, with a very special effort at making it as precise and accurate and credible as possible. So our postdoc, Leah Drew, she started by working out what the absolute test of wine, as opposed to grape juice or grapes or anything else, was. Came up with a series of acids that would detect that, and then used it to look at these pots on the left-hand side there, those with the stripy and curly paint on them. These are made in Palermo, and they were filled with wine, filled in wine in Palermo, and then they turn up at lots of other sites, as you see on the map.
Yeah, wine is not a taboo like pork, so it's a completely different stuff.
We don't know they drank wine. What we know is that they definitely traded in it.
Absolutely. And we have to think that a lot of people was Arabo-Christian. We have imagine an island that was really mixed. And another research done by a PhD in Tor Vergata is about the glass techniques and shapes. And it's very interesting how the shape of the glass changed through times. For example, in the Islamic period, what is very common, as you can see in the middle, are vessels for perfume and medicines, much more than for wine, for example. And then, as time goes by, and there is the Latino Christian Sicily, you can see you almost have wine bottles and glasses. And what is interesting, that also the composition of glass was changing to show that the contact with other culture was so important, not only in the shape of things, but also how things were made. So this is always the research done by Tor Vergata, together another ERC project that was Glass Roots, based in France. So again, ERC is bringing new relationship, international relationship that are very, very important. So the results here is that glass composition was changing through time. And let's have a look at the cemetery topic.
Well, quite briefly, but importantly, I think, we had access to 26 cemeteries which have been previously excavated by Sicilian archaeologists, and they generously let us have access to the material that they'd found. Most importantly, of course, human bone. Now, our task was to try and compare the biological characteristics with the individuals, be they Christian or Muslim, with the type of burial and the location of burial. So here we are at Castronova. We've got some old Archaeology type cave burials. Next one, please. And we did, we used these scientists here to analyze the anthropological data. So we have anthropologists from Sicily, Galassi and Verotto, and also from York. And here we have experts on stable isotopes, as strontium. We did yet another contact, this time with a Cypriot project. It wasn't an ERC project, but it's a Cypriot project called Human Mobility. And then ADNA was another. So we've got quite a few. You probably totted them up as we went along. We've got one or two, let's say 5, 6 PhDs that we've completed since we started the project. And hopefully all these will go on and have great careers. The next one, let's have another look. The way that this can be put together, so this is like a map which shows the itinerary of the investigation. We look at the cemeteries, the individuals in the cemeteries, their burial rites, so what sort of tombs were they buried in, where were the cemeteries located, and that together gives you, if you like, the normal archaeological interpretation of each cemetery. Then we add to these the microscopic and the molecular detail. So the microscopic detail is osteology. They look at the bones, they look for Harris lines, they look for evidence of illness in childhood and so forth. And the molecular is the stable isotopes, the ADNA, and of course the radiocarbon dating. And that leads down to what you might call the identity of an individual, and then these individual identities or biographies are fed up into the communities, and then we use the documented results to come up with a synthesis on how we think burial and cemeteries reflect these regime changes and the transition in Sicily. So here's a picture of, this is Castronovo, a beautiful landscape. Here we are on the side, excavating or re-excavating a late antique cemetery, rock cut, and with only a few bones left because it's already been excavated a couple of times by other people. But you only need a few bones, and then you're able to say what the date was, and also you can, with a bit of luck, you can get other molecular information as well. And so here we have on the left-hand side our specialists looking at skeletal material from Colle San Vitale and Casale San Pietro, both at Castronovo. And this too is a child's tomb in Castronovo, a little mini tomb lined with stone slabs. Another one here, this time accompanied by a brocchetta, little picture there. So although this particular site didn't have that many burials, it's nice to show it to you because you can see how all the team swings together around the anthropology and the biomolecular and the tomb type and the cemetery type as well. The most interesting thing, I suppose, from the point of view of the archaeologist and the historian of burial practice, is that we know that there was a major change of religion when the Muslims arrived in the 9th century. And our burials have been identified as Muslim burials when the body is lying on its right side and the head is turned and the face is turned towards Mecca. So this is like the identifier of this kind of burial. Now, assuming that's right, we then were able to plot all the Islamic cemeteries that had been discovered, and we put them into these 4 phases. So the earliest are in Palermo, which is not all that surprising since this was one of the first places to be settled by Muslims. And then in the 10th century, there is a big change, and it's been described in detail by Alessandra. All sorts of changes happened when the Calbids took over control of Sicily. And in our case, the effect was, first of all, to have the expansion of the Palermo cemetery, and then many hilltop cemeteries followed in the 11th and 12th century. Finally, there were 2 at Segesta and Monteato. These are 2 famous hilltop places. They are famous, actually, because they were the scenes of rebellions in the 12th and early 13th century. They contained cemeteries of enormous interest because they had both Christians and Muslims buried in different cemeteries, but next to each other.
And here is Segesta. The medieval name was Calata Barbaro, the castle of Berber. And well, this is the place in which I started to be a director in an archaeological excavation, and was so good because in Segesta there were so interesting story and so clearly seen. Well, obviously you can see the Hellenistic Roman theater, wonderful monument, but on the top of it there was an Islamic cemetery with people looking Mecca, with the skeleton looking Mecca. We also have a Christian church just near the citadel, but especially interesting was that I was able to recognize a mosque, the first one to be recognized in Sicily, and still the only one, because, well, it's a very simple building and wasn't that easy to recognize. But here you can see that these are monuments dating to the 12th, 13th century, and in a few centuries there was a very complex story. There was an Islamic village with the Islamic cemetery and the mosque. And then Christian lords arrived and built a citadel and destroyed the mosque, but built a church with a Christian cemetery in front of it. So this was excavated in the 90s, last century, and published. So we thought we quite understood the story of this special site. But with the ERC, we had the opportunity to study the bones, the skeleton of the two cemeteries with new techniques developed in New York. So the results were amazing, and Martin is going to explain to you quite soon. But these analyses were adding a lot to the story of Segesta, because one problem was what happened to the Muslim people after the Christian arrived, and did they mix somehow, or did they converted to the Christian faith? These were problems that remain open, but with the new research, we have new results and new things, new data to think about.
I think what excited the scientists was the possibility that these two communities, which professed different religions, were close to each other, and we had to determine, first of all, are they close together in time, or did one succeed the other? Well, we found that the Muslim cemetery, which you see here, that was the first, radiocarbon dated. It was their earliest, but it did continue into the period of the Christian cemetery, which is which we can show now, which was contemporary with them. So there seemed to be a very strong case that the Muslims and the Christians were both burying the dead at the same time, even if the Muslims had to abandon their village and live further down the slope. The other questions then, as Alessandro has mentioned, is, so these two communities are close together. What does that mean? How did they interact at all? And of course, as is often the case in science, you've got two different answers and you have to reconcile them. In the case of the case that they worked together, so to speak, and lived together, is from the stable isotopes. That said, they shared a very similar diet, and in fact they shared a lot of ceramics in there as well. But as far as intermarrying is concerned, there was no evidence for that at all. I think we could show you that. So basically, all these specimens have had their ancient DNA determined and the ancestry determined. And even if you can't say exactly where the origin of the people are, because we're only comparing the aDNA with the present DNA, it's not so accurate. But you can tell from this diagram, this PCA diagram, that there is a difference in where they are. So there's a blue line that separates the Muslim burials and the Christian burials. This is quite unusual when you think that if they all lived in Sicily, then they all descended, they all shared their genes. But in this case, we've got a group of Christians who don't seem to be rooted in Sicily. They've come from the outside somehow, and they've kept apart from the Muslim population that they found there.
And the hypothesis, you can say that the Christians were coming from northern Italy, and we know from written sources that the so-called Lombards arrived in Sicily in the 12th, 13th century. So this is quite similar to what the written sources were saying. And what is interesting is that they were not intermarriage.
Yeah, they weren't intermarrying.
So someone coming from places different from the local Muslim population and with a different faith, and well, for the time that the village of Segesta was surviving, they didn't cross.
I think this example shows quite well how tempting it is to generalize that Christians and Muslims were a multicultural society, for example. It's true earlier on, there is a lot of interchanging, and most of it can be read as let's say, there's a flexibility about which religion you're professing at a particular time, and there is good evidence that there was intermarriage. But this is an incident, a very important one, because it happens right at the end of the Muslim period in Sicily, when Frederick the Great decides, and the other lords also decide, that it's time to quell the rebellion, and in fact, in the end, they deported the Muslims from Sicily. So here's a little just a timeline showing when the Muslims arrived, the Normans arrived, and when the Muslims were deported. Muslim burial starts early, settlement follows it, Christian burial and settlement come together. The shared pottery and diet, they borrow each other's burial rites to a certain extent, but no evidence of intermarriage, and the cemetery is located separately. So it's a very interesting a rather dramatic instance in the history of Sicily, Sagesta. Well, I think it's worth saying that we were a very serious organisation, but we had a lot of fun, and we were very lucky that we had such a great team. There was the group from Rome and the group from York, but there was also a lot of other people who came in who heard about us, wrote in, said could they come and help. I forget how many nations there were, but we counted 14, I think, at one stage.
No, 19,
Oh,
because we were from Algeria, Brazil, and Lithuania, so it was really amazing.
We became a bit of a feature in the town. They fed us in the main square. So we had a big table in the main square with the lights on it, and everybody ate together. Very important to have a way of doing that. If you've got a big team, especially if you're mainly abroad, keep everybody close together and keep everybody happy and working fine. And that did work. And they also had accommodation in the houses and so forth. I think we got
maybe, well, we can summarize some of the main achievements. Well, one is the discovery of some of the oldest subtropical plant seeds introduced in Sicily during the Islamic period, like cotton, aubergines, spinach, or some kind of citrus fruit, and melons. Then the changing adherence to food taboos. This changed quite a lot. And also the waste management in town in different historical periods. For example, the attitude to dirt is changing a lot in the different periods. Another topic is the ability to adapt to climate change and transformation of agricultural systems. So the idea that the Mediterranean is always the same is not true at all. New plants and new way of cultivating them arrived. And different way of coexistence, separation or conflict, nothing straight or but rather complicate relationship between different people during different ages. And also interesting was a kind of continuity and resilience in the functioning of the state system. We saw Casale San Pietro remaining a road station with tax collectors through different regime, and this is also very interesting. And finally, the link between geopolitical affiliation and flows of goods. Obviously, there's some routes that are staying the same, but some are related to the changing empires in the Mediterranean. So just to summarize of the main results, and
this is one of the seminars we held. We held seminars in York and in Rome. That brought together a lot of people who didn't know much about the project, but they soon contributed to it. This was a very important part of knowledge sharing. And I think we've got one last slide, have we, for our credits that we should put on?
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute, there's the people of Castronovo having a talk from us. So every year we gave them a talk before we started, and then we gave them a talk at the end. It's a matter really of making sure this is all available to the public. We have an obligation to publish. We are publishing. We've published articles in the learned journal, in the scientific learned press. We've published Matsara already, and we've got 2 more monographs to come. So 3 big monographs. And in addition to that, we haven't forgotten that we owe a debt to the public of all these countries as well. So we're creating a website which everybody can visit. They can find it on YouTube, they can find it on the internet. And it's going to have a virtual museum, and it's going to explain what our results are, and it's going to invite people to visit Castronovo particularly, and go on a trek there to visit the site and explore the area and steep themselves in its history.
And finally...
And there's one of the monograph that's come out so far. That's the Matsara monograph. Quite thick, quite heavy.
With the aubergine seed.
and very brilliant. That's come out from Tor Vergata, and there's 2 more to go, and we hope to get those done by Christmas. So we should really just say a big thank you, I think, to all the people who've helped us. I'm not going to do it individually, obviously, but you could see from this picture that this is not something that's done sort of privately, like some of the old excavations were. We've been very much in the public eye. We've wanted to be. We've wanted to exchange views between our 3 universities. That's been one of the nicest things about the project, but certainly for me. We've wanted to bring on young academics, young researchers. So we've had these PhDs that have been finished. We've had postdocs. We've had people who've grown with us from coming in as people who've just finished a PhD and been promoted. Here in Tor Vergata, they've become professionals. They've become professional archaeologists. So I think there's a lot of reason to be pleased and say how lucky some of us are, particularly me, to be part of this marvelous project.
And I want to say thank you again for designing the project. And so it wasn't always easy to co-direct the project, but was a really such an interesting experience, so rich of new ideas. So I think I highly recommend to design project. And another topic is that I learned from Martin how to do a project, and now I'm proposing a new one that is moving even south. So I'm designing a new project including North Africa and Egypt. Egypt is amazing, is the place in which different culture met and different know-how arrived from, for example, China, India, through Egypt, and then in the Mediterranean. So I'm moving south to the very earth of some of the novelties of the Islamic period.
I'm rather sad not to be coming with you.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I've started a new project. So I'm now building a full-size version of the Sutton Hoo ship, rather a different kind of project.
Yeah.
But I shall never forget our time in Sicily.
Yeah. So, and thank you to all there were 40 young people working, and less young people, working with us. And so it was a really nice experience. And also during the COVID period, we were able to have a network and go on. Yeah.
Kept going on Zoom. We kept seeing each other on Zoom, like the rest of the world had the same experience. But somehow we kept going, which was amazing.
So thank you very much.